Okay, today we're going to talk about recruitment with business coach Ian Kinnery. Ian, I've been looking at your website and you're reading some of the insights and the blog posts, and you talk an awful lot about recruitment, particularly over the last few months. You seem to be more and more interested in the recruitment side of it. I've just got a couple of questions I want to ask you and try and pick your brain on a few things. One of the things you talk about, like A players, you're talking about recruiting A players and keeping A players and how you find your A players and so on. So what I want to know to start with, what do you mean by an A player? How do you define an A player? Can you tell me a bit more about it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, A player is a term that's in the language now, but it's actually quite a precise term. And an A player, if you imagine a 2x2 grid where along the bottom axis you measure performance,
right,
and the vertical axis you measure core values. Now, core values are essentially, they get the way we do things around here. It's more detailed than that, but that'll be a rule of thumb for now. So an A player is somebody who consistently performs well,
right,
and consistently behaves in a way that we would expect them to behave.
So they're in the top right-hand corner.
Absolutely, the top right-hand corner.
Okay, so they're high-performing and understand the way you do business.
Understand the way we behave, our ethics, our ethos,
okay,
our standards.
So a C player, I'm assuming A, B, C, or a D player would be bottom left.
So bottom left is a C player.
Right.
They neither perform well nor are they somebody that we really should have on the team.
Okay.
And what do we do with a C player? We exit a C player. So top right is A player, bottom left is C player. Top left is a B player. They get what we're about, but they don't yet perform well.
Right.
So the job there is to help move them to an A player. The one that is the most controversial is the bottom right. So that's somebody that performs well, but doesn't get who we are. They're also a C player.
Right, okay.
A friend of mine also refers to them as a toxic A player. They're the terrorists within the organization.
Because they're the people who don't understand the business ethics, don't understand the way it works, but they do perform.
Yeah, so, I grew up in the motor trade, and I've got a real life example of this, which I eventually learned at my cost. And I've actively got rid of people who sold a lot of cars, but they only ever sold a car once. They sold you a car, you never came back, you never brought your wife, your parents, your kids. And my core values was about having customers for life. So he may have been an A player in another establishment, but the way I wanted to run the business, he was a toxic A player at best. And we've got to get rid of those people. They're the terrorists in the organization. They'll destroy it from the inside.
Can't the ethics and the core values, though, change depending on the management teams and the current culture of the company? I've been in companies where I'm sure I've been a C. I'm sure I've been a saboteur because I didn't get the way the company worked. I might have performed well, but I didn't fit in. I know I've been in that position. But then you go somewhere else and you are an A because you do get it, doesn't it? Isn't it hard to define and therefore classify people by the core values and the way we do business?
Well, that's part of the skill. First and foremost, we've got to define what the organization's core values are.
Right.
And then we've got to try and ascertain what the candidates or the job holders' core values are, and do they align? Core values are about who we are. it's not something that you can get away with. It's not like a suit of clothes that you put on when you go to work. I mean, to take a very trite example, if honesty is a core value, and why wouldn't it be? And you have somebody who's a pathological liar, you know, they may be able to mask that for a while, but eventually the truth will out. And if honesty is particularly important to you as a business, there really isn't a place for a pathological liar. And the other thing is that, you know, I'm a coach, so I fundamentally believe that people can change. But the time and effort to get somebody to change their core values is huge.
Right.
I'm not saying it's impossible. What I am saying is it's probably impractical.
So you would
business
be
environment.
So you'd be removing or exiting the C players. You get the B player to be an A player, and you, rather than take the time to, because it's impractical, to move the C players, because I mean there will be the odd C player who you can correct, I suspect, and appraisal processes and someone can do something. But I suppose you're right. At the end of the day, you fundamentally can't change. You can't get them to fit in. They need to be exited. And if there are some fundamental clashes, they need to be exited. Okay, but then if that's the case, then recruiting an A player isn't as simple as having an interview or looking at a CV. So if you're going to give customers, if you're going to give your businesses a piece of advice about how they go about recruiting an A player, which is clearly very important, what would that be? What advice would you give them?
Well, first and foremost, and I think the single, and this sounds very trite, but the single best bit of advice I can give is know what you're looking for.
Right.
You know, and that starts with the job itself. And we have a thing that we call a scorecard. Yep. You know, what are the markers that you want the person in that job to hit? We've got to be really clear what we're recruiting for.
Right.
So that's the first thing, and that correlates to the performance axis on the graph.
Yeah.
And very quickly, Martin, a very easy way to do that is at the end of the first year, when that person's performing, what results, what outputs will you want to see? Right. And you've got to think of that before you even start recruiting. The second area is core values. You know, what would somebody that, well, first and foremost, you've got to know what the organization's core values are.
Yes.
And how will somebody behave that adheres to those core values, that have those core values as part of their core? So, you know, a really good discipline is to have at least 2 interviews as part of the process.
Mm-hmm.
One to assess, and these will probably be done by different people, one to assess the performance potential of this person,
mm-hmm.
and the other one to assess, for want of a better expression, the cultural fit.
Okay. So if I can see, because when I was much younger, I went through a lot of assessment centres and assessment sessions where you spend all day being tested in various things. And I can see that people were trying to get what your performance level would be and trying to see if there was a cultural fit. But there's also got to be a cultural fit within the organisation as a whole and within the team within the organisation, because organisations are split up. But in order to achieve that, then, what about the involvement of recruitment consultants and recruitment businesses? Because they're never or are they? What's your view? Because my view is that they'd struggle to understand the cultural context of the business because they're not in it. Or am I wrong?
No, I think you're pretty much right. I mean, you know, recruitment consultants have a place, I think, but they're part of that funnel. If you liken recruiting people to making a sale, and there are very close similarities, they're in that funnel, or they can be part of that funnel. But but they're at the top of the funnel. They're at the sourcing stage, I would argue.
Right.
And I would strongly advise against anybody delegating or abdicating that selection process to somebody out with the organization, because you've got to be inside the organization to really understand it. I mean, it's a very difficult thing to even writing core values can be extremely difficult. You know, how do you describe a person? How do you describe the culture of an organization? So I think there is a place for professional recruitment consultants, but we must never forget that their role is to provide the company with candidates. The company's role is to get absolutely the right recruit, and there's a difference.
So how do you? It's quite. I can see how one can look at someone's. You can look at someone's past performance, and you can read what experience they've got, and you can get some knowledge of them by interview process to get a view of how they will perform. It won't necessarily be accurate, but it will be a view. But how do you go about assessing their cultural fit? How do you? Because that's the key difference between A's, B's, and C's, isn't it? Really, it's performance and cultural fit. Is how are you going to assess the cultural fit? How are you going to? What tricks are there to be able to do that?
I'm not going to rise to the tricks bit. I think the answer is, you know, to have some really good questions,
right,
and listen to the replies. I mean, you know, don't make the mistake of asking somebody if they're honest, because you're just teeing them up to say, yes, of course I'm honest. But get them talking. You know, if you find out that, and this would be through a conversational, which is why you're better off doing at least a two-stage interview, one for cultural fit. If in the conversation you find out, for example, that they usually go into town with their mates on a Saturday night and there's always a kitty, and the candidate in front of you always ends up holding the kitty, well, that will probably indicate that his mates or her mates think he or she's honest.
Right, okay.
So you kind of need to listen for some of those clues.
So you need to listen, and you need to kind of draw them out into a wider conversation.
Absolutely, and it's rarely a direct question. You've got to come at these things obliquely. But again, as I answered to your first question, you've got to know what you're looking for.
Okay. So on that basis, then, you need to, as a business, recruiting and finding and getting A players is becoming increasingly important. Now, I noticed on a lot of things you talk about attracting A players more than recruiting A players. So can you just talk to me a bit about that? What you see as the difference, and what can a business do to attract A players then? What's the difference, and what should we be doing?
Okay, so recruiting implies that we go out looking for, hunting, if you like. Maybe in the same way as you would do if you were looking for customers to sell to. Attracting is exactly what it says. They come looking for you. You know, the best example is Google. Google get more applicants. It's harder to get a job in Google than it is to get a place at Harvard.
Oh, right. Okay.
Why? Because they just attract those really curious, bright young things, because they have an aura about them of being the place where bright people can do creative things.
Right.
That's attracting.
There is the risk, though, as a person looking for a job, that's a Venus flytrap, isn't it? Because there are a lot of companies that look great and attract A players, but actually under the surface, they're not.
Oh, absolutely. So, but again, the interview process is two-way, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's where the employer is looking to recruit the best candidate, and the candidate should be looking for the best match, the best environment for himself or herself to really flourish. And the best recruitment is when it's literally a win-win. It is like matchmaking. If one of them feels shoehorned into it, it rarely works out.
So what can a company do then if a company wants to get this aura? Obviously, it's got to be for companies you work with and companies we want to work with. It's got to be real. It can't be a Venus flytrap. It's got to be a real. But what can they do to attract A players? Because that's a different approach.
Oh, very much
different to going out and finding people.
Yeah, very much, and it's. I would say it's a more modern approach. It's certainly one that where businesses are good at, they will have an edge. But it's really about the environment that we create. I think we've got to be as active now at marketing to future team members as we are marketing to future customers.
Well, that's interesting because I mean, I talk to a lot of companies and we've got a lot of clients, and they're most of the thing they're most worried about is surviving. Certainly, up until second 3 months of last year or this year, second 3 months of this year was tough, and then it seemed to get a bit easier, and I think it's going to get worse again. And companies are their big priority in their heads, it seems to me, at least the thing that's blocking everything out, is surviving. But you're talking more about recruitment, and you say there that it's important now to be trying to attract the right people. Why are you so interested in it at the moment then? Why do you think a business should be doing that at the moment?
Well, for precisely the same reasons. People, I think several things have happened. Lots and lots of things have happened, haven't they, with COVID? But one of the things is that because of furlough and because of a lot of things, people have stood back and looked at their team members. And a lot of them have thought, how many of them are really A players? Now that's a discipline that I would advocate that we adopt regularly.
That's wasn't it? How often should they be assessing them on that scale then?
Well, when I'm coaching scale-up businesses, we talk about that subject every quarter.
Every quarter. So really, you should be going through your team. If you're a part of an organisation, going through your team, if you're or a small organisation, and assessing your people against performance and cultural fit. I suppose you can then address issues more rapidly. We used to get appraisals once a year. It was too late to.
Well, once a year is rubbish, isn't it? We can only remember the last 4 or 5 weeks, and we can probably only remember the bad things. So the review or appraisal is a bit of a farce. I mean, I think in all of my working life, I probably had 2 of them, and that they were both deeply, deeply unsatisfying. But it should be an ongoing conversation. And what I recommend is that every 90 days, you sit down with your boss or you sit down with your direct report. You have a formal way of evaluating this. You should both be really clear on what's the performance measurement. You should both be really clear on what are the behaviors that would indicate that we're living the core values, and that should be a regular conversation with a specific timeout every 90 days. And what I find is when that happens, instead of it becoming a retrospective where we're talking about what happened over the last year, about which neither of us can do anything, it starts to flip. And well, in the next 90 days, this is what I'm going to do. In the next 90 days, this is what I'm going to learn. This is what I'm going to practice. This is what I'm going to perfect. This is what I'm going to improve. And it becomes far more satisfactory for both parties.
Do you think by doing that you can stop somebody, or at least, yeah, you can stop somebody becoming a C player? Because the longer you go on, the more diverse people can get, can't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I actually recommend and practice is, as part of that review,
Yeah.
on the review sheet that I use, I've got the A player grid. And I will say to the person I'm reviewing, where do you think you are on that grid?
Okay.
And I'll make an assessment as well. And I've had this conversation. Well, how do you put yourself to the right of that performance midway mark when of your five indicators, 3 of them are red? And I think one of the major areas of problems that we have with when we're employing people is when they think they're doing a good job.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we don't. Or, well, when one person thinks they're doing a good job, the other person doesn't.
Yes.
And if we can just clear that fog and trade in the truth, then we've got a choice of, and if I'm the employee, I know I've got a choice. Either I shape up or I ship out. It's fairly
quite straightforward then. Okay, can we take a step back? Because I went off on a tangent then, because I wanted to ask you something. But let's go back to the point of why, when companies are hunkering down mentally in their survival, why is it you clearly think it's, obviously they should be assessing their teams to go forward, but why is it so important now from a recruitment point of view?
well, a number of reasons. I think as we come out of this particular period, it's going to be a battle. It's going to be a battle for survival. And the key requirement is talent.
Right.
Remember that over the last 10 or 15 years, big chunks of the mechanics of business have been taken over by computers. It's systems. So it's really difficult to get an edge there. What it means is that the people and how we work together are the edge.
Right.
And if you've got too many C players, you can't have an edge.
So because
the other thing at the moment is you're never going to have a better time or a better chance of finding really good talent. Because
isn't one of the challenges now, though, that certainly at certain levels where you put a job up, I was hearing on the news the other day, they put a job up for a person to work behind a bar and they get 2,000 applicants. Is it a lack of talent, do you think, that's out there, or is it too many numbers? What is the biggest issue, the biggest restriction on people finding the right talent then?
I think that, for years people have said there's not enough talent out there. And yet you get businesses like Google that are going gangbusters. So there is talent out there. The question is, are you the business that they want to work for?
Yes. Do you? Is it you attracting that talent? Is the talent attracted to you as much as can you find the talent? Because you do wonder, like you say, does Netflix have to find? Does Netflix, which I'm a big fan of from a marketing point of view, does Netflix ever have to go out and look for a marketing person? No. I've got an agency. I know somebody's applied for a job there in Manchester, and I guarantee there will be maybe 500 applicants for that job, and there will be some very talented people because the agency is everything about it is the place to work. So yeah, I see what you're saying. If you put the effort in, and if you put the effort in now into making yourself attractive, you will have to put less effort in finding people.
You've got it.
Yeah. Okay.
However, that I do realize that that's maybe a longer term solution.
Yes.
And I think what will be difficult is for a lot of, let's say, not traditional businesses, but businesses that are led or managed in a traditional stroke old-fashioned way,
Yes.
because that holds little attraction for the younger folk.
Yes. Yes.
They're interested in different things.
Yes. So if you're an engineering company that does traditional engineering, for example, you might find yourself less attractive than what is perceived a VR,
But
AR.
I don't think it's the traditional engineering that's the
Right.
problem.
Okay.
It's the traditional mindset of the leaders.
Right.
You know,
Okay.
if you're doing traditional engineering, I mean, I can take you to an engineering firm not far from here and it's traditional engineering, it's high tech,
Mm-hmm.
but the whole ethos of the place is really creative. It's inspiring for people.
Right.
People love working there. It's managed, I would say, professionally. So it's not the work itself, it's everything that comes with it.
Okay. Okay. And there
Whereas,
are.
whereas you could take, let's say, a high-tech business that's managed like an old-fashioned sweatshop.
Yes.
So the thing that the business does is sexy and appealing, but the way it does it is far from.
Yes. Okay. Okay. So yeah, I understand. I can get that. Okay, because I've worked for places where the product is, as you say, sexy and appealing, and it's like working back in the 1920s.
Yeah.
And I've worked for other companies, other car companies, where the cars are slightly more boring, but the ethos, the whole place is attractive. But so the challenge is how to attract people rather than have to go out and find people.
Yeah.
And that now is a good time to start thinking about and working on that and assessing your teams. Okay, so you've been a coach for how many years?
Almost 16 now. It depends how long it takes you to edit this video.
No, not long. 16, and you've been in business for, because I think you're about my age. I know you've been in business for over 30 years, haven't you?
Yeah.
So, just one final question, if I can get the question out. What's the biggest mistakes you've come across? If you look back over your years of coaching and working, what do you think are the biggest mistakes you've come across, without giving names away of people who, would be embarrassed?
I think it goes back to the first question, not knowing what we're looking for. You know, there's a plaque on the wall outside that says clarity is power. And that's never more true than when we're recruiting.
Clarity is power.
You know, if you know what you're looking for, you stand a chance of finding it.
Is that why companies? Because I've worked at companies where you can clearly see the people are wrong. I've got a place where, and I've been recruited, and I know I was wrong. Do you think it's because they don't understand? Why do people make that mistake?
To be honest, I think I don't think enough of us think through recruitment. You know, it's one of the most, well, just think about it for a minute. It's one of the most important roles in building and running a business.
Yeah.
And yet, who's had any training in it, for a start? Who's ever really sat and thought about it, really thought about it? And we tend to do what we've always seen done.
Yes.
We put an advert out, we have a naive interview, and we hope that we've got the right person. But probably, I think the statistics are something like 80-85% of the time, we haven't got the right person.
80 to 85%.
And there's the old adage, you know, we spend 2 hours recruiting somebody and 20 years regretting it. So clarity is I think, knowing what we're looking for,
Mm-hmm.
and alongside that, not being allowing ourselves to be hoodwinked. So we see something in a candidate and we think, oh, she'll be a great fit, but we're kind of making it fit. It doesn't really fit. Does that make sense?
It does. It does, because I mean, I've recruited people, and sometimes you've had 5 applicants. None of them really fit, but they're the 5 applicants. So you shoehorn one into the job, and inevitably, well, sometimes it works, but probably probably 2 out of 10.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, I think there's a lot of science, there's a lot of headroom in improving our recruitment processes. I don't think it'll ever be perfect because we're dealing with people.
Yeah.
But you know, you take a simple thing. Normally, the candidate would go through his or her career history. How many times do we ever pick up the phone and speak to the previous boss? And, you know, I'm not talking about the standard UK reference.
No.
I did one for somebody a few months ago, and it came through from an outside agency. Did this person work for you between these dates? Yes or no? Were they reliable? Yes or no? Well, what the hell is that going to tell you?
Well, also people are scared to put anything negative, aren't they?
So, you know, one of the techniques is to let the candidate know right at the outset that you will be doing those reference checks.
Yeah.
And to underline it, you're going to ask the candidate to fix up the call with the previous employer. Now, that will scare a lot of people off. And this is about deselection as much as it's about selection.
Right.
But, you know, and I'm embarrassed to say this, but I know that for years I didn't take references.
Yeah.
Not even the basic, did they work there? Were you happy with them?
No, not once have I done that.
No. And I'm embarrassed to admit it, but that's why we get recruitment wrong so often.
Yeah. I've given references and I've had people ring me up and ask me about staff, and I've been, you know, honestly positive. You never say anything negative, ever say anything negative about my staff. You've got to be honestly positive. But I've never done that myself. No, not once.
So it's easy to see how we can improve that process. And I say that process knowing that many businesses don't have a recruitment process. They just wing it, stick an advert in, interview. Typically, you know, they get, let's say, 20 applications through. They might decide to interview 10. They do it over a fortnight period. By the time they're interviewing candidate number 4, they can't remember what candidate number 1 was, because there's no score chart. There's nothing to compare them. It's not difficult to think of ways we can improve that process.
No. And particularly now, as you say, if you've got your A's, your B's and your C's, and if 80% of your staff are B's and C's, if you can switch that around slightly, if you could add 10%, then you're onto a winner, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, right. Well, I've got a lot to think about, and I've got a lot to go through my own head what I've done wrong over the years. And I'm also going through my head thinking, was it really fair of me to be a C player in that company just because I didn't fit in for some reason? And it probably wasn't, but that's the truth. So, okay, well, thank you very much, Ian. We'll talk about something else again in the new year.
All right, you're more than welcome.
Thanks a lot. You take care of yourself.
And you.
Bye.
Bye now.
Okay, I'll stop recording.